there's something that came to me recently as I was reading. I was reading one of the books of Solomon, Ecclesiastes. And as I was reading it, this came to me. And so you're going to get the benefit of something that happened halfway through the night from my mind. People are absolutely desperate. Is that not true? They're frantically scratching around, desperately trying to put together things, building things, trying to get somewhere in life. And as they're frantically collecting these things, they're fighting for position in a world that craves success, doesn't it? They're fighting for position, and they're really in what you would call a free-for-all. Do you know what a free-for-all is? A free-for-all is when every single person fends only for themselves. You don't have a partner in this. You're all by yourself. And that's really kind of what this world is made up of. So in this free-for-all, someone collecting all these things, and they're fighting against everybody they meet, and in the end, they lay on their deathbed, and the sad news is, suddenly they realize something. They spent their entire life in this mad rush for success, only to lay on their deathbed and realize they forgot to ask the fundamental question of life. And what is that? What is the meaning of life? Can you imagine laying on your deathbed only to realize that life is meaningless? Only to realize that you suddenly discover that everything you laid up and collected your whole life is now going to belong to someone else. You know you're not taking it with you, right? So you're laying on your deathbed and you suddenly realize everything I worked for my entire life is now getting ready to pass to someone else who doesn't appreciate how hard I had to work to get it, who doesn't appreciate how difficult it was for me to get to the level that I got to in order to achieve it, who is definitely not going to appreciate what it's going to be like to consume those things that I collected. And suddenly you realize it is all like dust in the wind. Is that not true? This is one of the most relevant things ever written. It was written by King Solomon 3,000 years ago. And it was in the book of Ecclesiastes. King Solomon was, according to the scriptures, the wisest man who ever lived. In fact, the scriptures also tell us that he's the wisest man who will ever live. So we're never going to be able to achieve the wisdom of this guy. And today I want to share some of the things that he said with you that just blow my mind. But can you imagine the title? You're the wisest man who's ever going to live. He was given that title before he ever died. So that's kind of a burden to bear, don't you think? But guess what? Solomon didn't do too well with that title. If you read the whole story of Solomon, you find out that he started off with great wisdom and used that wisdom to collect riches, untold riches, and he had great power. But in the end, Solomon died without God. Isn't that sad? Now that is really sad because Solomon died without God and he was the wisest man to ever live. What does that tell you about wisdom? You don't really need wisdom to find God. In fact, a lot of times I think you're better off if you're not wise. In fact, God even said, "Come to me like little children. Get rid of all the things you think you know and approach me like a little child." If you can do that, you're really going to understand the power of God. So this is this thing with wisdom, and all this wisdom goes to the head of Solomon, and eventually he turns his back on God, and that's how he dies. He dies without God. But we're not going to focus on that part of Solomon. What I want to focus on is some of the wisdom in the writings of Solomon this morning. Now, the thing about Ecclesiastes, the book is unique in that the book of Ecclesiastes is not a book that's like a revelation from God. A lot of times, you have a book of prophecy, and they'll say, "Thus said the Lord as he passed me." And Solomon specifically says, all of this stuff that I'm writing in this book is wisdom that I have gained through reasoning as what I've seen on earth. Now, we know that God inspired it to be here so we could understand. This is the best that man could come up with. This book was the best wisdom man could come up with, and God wanted us to see how foolish it really is. After all we review from this wise man, we realize that really the most wise man on earth is still foolishness when you compare it to God. So anyway, we're going to move on. And this book very specifically focuses on the life of man, the creature man, and his life here on earth. And it emphasizes those really strange things that we experience in human life. For example, Solomon talks about, this is why I'm going to give you this little piece before we start reading, but think about this as it relates to our current world. Solomon talks about injustice to the poor. Solomon talks about crooked politics. Solomon talks about incompetent leaders. Solomon talks about guilty people who are allowed to continue to commit crimes. Doesn't that sound like today? This stuff's been going on for thousands and thousands of years. And you know, Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun. I guess we can prove that, right? He had the same stuff going on in those days. Amazing. So we're going to turn to the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, verse 1. And I'm going to read a lot of scripture today, so I apologize in advance. But I say that all the time, don't I? Sorry about that. Okay, these are the words of the teacher. The son of David, king of Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit has a man from his labor in which he toils under the sun? One generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. The sun also rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it arose. The wind goes south and turns towards the north. The wind whirls about continually and comes again on its circuit. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place from where the rivers come, they return again. All things are full of labor. Man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear with hearing. That which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. There is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which it may be said, see, this is new? It has already been in ancient times before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be remembrance of things that are to come. Sounds like he's talking in a circle, doesn't it? By those who will come after. I, the preacher, was king over all Israel in Jerusalem. And I set my heart to seek and to search out wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. This burdensome task has been given to the sons of man, that they may be exercised. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed it is all vanity, and it's like grasping for the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight. What is lacking cannot be numbered. I communed with my heart and said, look, I have attained greatness, and I have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge, and I set my heart to know wisdom, and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this is also grasping for the wind. For much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases in knowledge just increases in sorrow. Isn't that sad news? Now here is a man of incredible wisdom. This is the wisest man to ever live. And he is saying wisdom is absolutely sorrowful. The more I know, the more sorrowful I am. Isn't that terrible? It's a terrible thing. And it sounds almost hopeless, doesn't it? But we are going to continue reading in chapter 2, picking up verse 1. Chapter 2, this is the teacher continuing to write. He said, in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth. Therefore, enjoy pleasure. But surely this also was vanity. I said of laughter, madness. What does it accomplish? I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly until I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. And I made my works great. I built myself houses, and I planted myself vineyards, and I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in those gardens. I made myself water pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male servants and female servants, and I had servants born in my house. I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me, greater than anyone ever before him. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the special treasures of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and the delight of sons of men, and the musical instruments of all kinds. So I became great, and I excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem, and all my wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. He's saying I experienced everything I could experience. For my heart rejoiced in all of my labor, and this was my reward for all my labor. Then I looked at all the works my hands had done, and on all the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed it was all vanity. It was just grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun. So I said it once before, having untold wealth, this guy could do anything he wanted to do. Anything. There was nothing that was beyond his grasp. And though he's saying here, I did every single thing I could find. I experimented with pleasure. I experimented with everything that I could buy, everything I could experience, everything that was available in those days 3,000 years ago. And I come to the conclusion, nothing is worthwhile anywhere. That's pretty depressing, isn't it? Nothing is worthwhile anywhere. But if you thought that was depressing, it gets a little bit worse. In verse 12, he picks up saying, "So I decided to compare wisdom and folly, and anyone who would come to the same conclusion I did. Wisdom is of more value than foolishness, just as light is better than darkness. For the wise person sees while the fool is blind. Yet I saw that wise and foolish people share the same fate." So what is he saying? It doesn't matter if you're smart or if you're not smart, you're still going to die. This is just getting too depressing. Both of them die. Just as the fool will die, so will I. So what value is my wisdom? Then I said to myself, this is all so meaningless. You guys are going to hate me when I'm done with this one, aren't you? For the wise person and the fool both die, and in the days to come, both are going to be forgotten. So now I hate life because everything done under the sun is so irrational. Everything is meaningless. It's just like chasing the wind. I am disgusted that I must leave all of the fruits of my hard work to others. And who can tell whether my successors will be wise or foolish? Will they just throw away everything I did? Or will they continue to turn it into more? So I turned in despair from hard work, because it was not the answer to my search for satisfaction in this life. For though I do my work with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, I must leave everything I gain to people who haven't worked to earn it. This is not only foolish, but is highly unfair. So what do people get for all the hard work? Their days of labor are filled with pain and grief. Even at night, they can't even rest. It's all so meaningless. Are you getting depressed yet? I guess it's a good thing this isn't a 2-story building, because I'd probably have to have guards in front of the windows to keep you guys from jumping out. But it does eventually land, by the way, just in case you wondered. He moves on to chapter 3 and says, I noticed also that throughout the world there is even evil in the courtroom. We talked about this, corrupt politics. Yes, even the courts of law are corrupt. I said to myself, in due season God will judge everyone, both good and bad for their deeds. Then I realized God allows people to continue in their sinful ways so He can test them. That way they can see for themselves that they're no better than animals. For human and animals both breathe the same air and they both die. So really humans have no advantage over animals. How meaningless. Both go to the same place, to the dust from which they came. For who can prove that the human spirit goes upward and the spirit of animals goes downward in the earth? So I saw there is nothing better for people than to be happy in their work. That's why they're here. No one will bring them back from death to enjoy the future. So Solomon continues, and as I was reading this, when I first was reading this and the message that came after that, I thought to myself, this is very depressing. As a matter of fact, I'm feeling very depressed. As I read it, I got even more depressed. Now think about this for just a second. If you stop and think about this. Life is actually meaningless. There is no hope. Like Solomon said, we are like animals, right? We're going to return to the dirt. We know where we're going. It's completely meaningless. We would actually be better off as animals. That's what Solomon's saying here. Solomon goes on to say that God gives wealth and honor to some people, and then He doesn't allow them to enjoy it. They die young. It's all meaningless. A sickening tragedy. He goes on to say a man might have hungry children and live to be very old, while the rich man died young. It doesn't make any sense, right? It's all meaningless. It doesn't make any sense. And he said, actually, I realized that this guy's birth would have been meaningless and ended in darkness. He wouldn't have even had a name. He'd have been better off born dead. He might live 1,000 years twice over, but not find contentment. And since he must die like everyone else, well, what's the use? And as I was looking at all of that, I said, you know, this is really what it boils down to for me. We are living a life that has no purpose. We are living a life that is completely meaningless. We go from dust to dust, right? There's no purpose. There's nothing. What is missing? There's something really important that's missing here. What is missing? We're missing hope. What's missing in this picture of life is hope. In this passage, as he's writing all of this stuff, it goes way beyond what I wrote there, what I read to you there. But it's detail after detail of everything this guy experienced, everything he tried to do in his lifetime, and at the end of it, he found the same dead-end road. It's meaningless. It's useless. And as I looked at this picture, I said, there's got to be something that we're missing here. I mean, what's missing is hope. And what is hope? Where does hope come from? Hope comes from the idea that our existence here on earth is bigger than just from dust to dust. We're living with a purpose that's greater than the actual life we live. See, we were created by God as eternal creatures. We don't ever die. Our spirit never dies. That's why we were created. We were created by God who loves us, who wants to experience a relationship with us. forever. That's the hope that we have that lives within us. That's where hope comes from, and that's what hope actually is. Hope is an existence after this one. Hope is the fact that after this life that we live here on earth, which is full, we all know this, it's full of pain, it's full of grief, it's full of difficult situations. After this is all over, there's an eternal existence that's full of beautiful things in a relationship forever with God. So what does this mean? Well, what I wanted to bring this to is this. The world sees life as meaningless. Why? Because it doesn't know the hope part. The world that we are surrounded by every single day, the people we rub elbows with every single day, those people don't know hope. So what does their life feel like? Did you hear the despair in the voice of Solomon as he's writing these passages? He's explaining what life is like when you're separated from God. A life without God is a meaningless life. So that's what people are experiencing that are around us every single day. Now I want you to put yourself in this position. Imagine that you don't know God exists. Imagine that there is no God. Now put yourself in what you're doing every single day. Why am I getting up every day and going to work? Why am I bothering to eat? Why am I bothering to clothe myself? Why am I bothering with all this stuff? Because in the end, I'm just going to go back to dust. Well, that's the hopelessness and despair that people around us are experiencing. This is the difference between knowing the good news of Jesus Christ and feeling the hopelessness that Solomon wrote about here. That's the big gap here. Is it any wonder that people are swimming in a sea of addiction? Our world is plagued with addiction. I mean, there are literally thousands of people in this town alone that are dying every single day because of addiction. Why? Because they don't understand, they don't embrace, they don't fully understand the good news of Jesus Christ. They don't fully understand that what we do here is only preparing us for what we do forever in eternity. There's a big, big revelation there for them. The problem is we're the ones who know, they're the ones who don't know. So that leaves us with the burden to tell them. So why are these people given to addiction, drugs, alcohol, and all this other stuff? Why are they given to these addictions? I'll tell you why. Because they're trying to numb the pain of a hopeless life. That's why. If you could just put yourself into their shoes and understand the heavy weight that's bearing down on them, they're being crushed beneath this total despair. You heard the words of Solomon 3,000 years ago, the same stuff people are experiencing if they didn't have God in their life. It's all for nothing. But if you add God into the picture, it changes everything. And this is what I thought about as I was reading this. I'm thinking, here's these people surrounding us every single day, loaded with despair and hopelessness. And we casually pass on by as if we don't even care. See, God wants us to aggressively pursue these people and share with them what we know. There is hope. This life isn't useless. This life isn't meaningless. This life is a pre-life to an eternal life. That's the reason why we need to stop all of our holding back from telling people about the good news. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, but God puts us in situations all the time to share the good news of Jesus with people. And often we shy away from it because we're nervous. But think about this from their perspective. They've got this heavy weight bearing down on their shoulders, and you have the power to reach out and take it off the back. And you don't do it? It seems bizarre to me. Don't forget that the greatest calling here on earth is to preach the good news to everyone that we meet. You can't over-evangelize the good news. You can't over-tell people about the love of Jesus. Why? Because it is the thing that takes the burden off their back. If they're feeling hopeless and despair, that's the answer. We have the answer, and yet we hold it to ourselves, maybe out of fear. So I wanted to open your eyes a little bit to see from someone else's perspective who doesn't know Jesus. Think about how difficult and hopeless your life would be if you didn't have Him. Think about how hopeless your life was before you found Him. I know that's my case as well. Before I found Jesus and I had this fulfillment of life, I was hopeless and despairing. I was sad and lonely. And then He came and met those needs for me. See, Solomon doesn't say, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. He doesn't say that because he advises instead that we are to trust God with what we have. One of the things that I think is interesting about Solomon, and I didn't read the rest of it, but he brings it back around and he adds God back into the picture. So we'll talk about that a little bit real quick here before we wrap up. But one of the things he says is, rather than complain about what you do not have, why don't you just enjoy what you do have? Now that's wisdom, isn't it? Because I've seen so many people whine and cry their whole way through life. Eventually, they perish anyway, and they still have nothing.
It's all of no use. God gives you things, and he wants you to use those things and enjoy those things. Now Solomon, as we read here, he opens up this book with 3 really interesting statements. Everything under the sun. Life is not worth living because of 3 things. Nothing has ever changed. Nothing is really new. And nothing is really understood. And if you think about that, how many times have you seen a situation you say, I don't understand this. This doesn't make any sense to me. Why did this happen? Why did that happen? We do not understand it. And Solomon says that is absolutely true. If you look at life just from the surface level, you're going to come to the conclusion that it doesn't make any sense. Life isn't worth living. And he gave 4 things in that summary. Life is monotonous. Life is vanity. Wealth is useless. Completely useless. Although most of us wish we had more, don't we? And death is certain. So those are 4 things that he points out. Those are certain. And then he presents those arguments, and really it made it appear that life is absolutely hopeless. But then he brings God into the picture, and God changes everything. So I'm going to give you his picture of what a difference it makes as you look at God in relationship to each of these statements. The first is that life is not monotonous, but rather life is full of challenging situations that God puts us in. He puts us in these challenging situations. Each situation you go through is in its own time and for its own purpose. We grow, we're shaped, we're made into better people. That's how God works. No, we don't understand it, but that's what we can experience. He also says that wealth can be enjoyed. We can enjoy our wealth, and we can use our wealth to glorify God. Think about people who take their wealth and they give to the poor. That's using great things to do great things. Wealth isn't a curse, wealth is a blessing, but God's going to evaluate you on how you use your wealth. So if you have it, you've got to be careful about how you use it. And the other thing he says is that man's wisdom cannot explain everything. That we know. You come to the conclusion that life is useless. You add God into the picture, it changes everything. So we should follow God's wisdom rather than practice man's folly. And as for death, we all know we're going to die someday. There's no way to escape death. So what should we do? We should embrace the life we have now. Every single day when we wake up, we should say, thank you, God, for giving me life today. Let me live my life to the fullest today. And let me bring honor and glory to you through my life today. Because tomorrow we don't know what it holds. So Solomon had 4 observations. Life is an adventure. We should live by faith. Life is a gift. We should enjoy it. Life is a school. Learn your lessons. And life is a stewardship. Whatever he blesses you with, you need to fear God and use it very, very carefully. Life is an adventure of faith, and it's anything but predictable, that's for sure, isn't it? Are there questions we can't answer and problems we can't solve? Yes. But don't despair. Why? Because God teaches us through his truth. And as we advance through the school of life, God gives us the wisdom that we need at the right moment we need it to make the decision that he needs us to make. Isn't that true? Just when you think, oh, all hope is lost, suddenly the wisdom comes and you make the right decision and you find yourself better off than you were before. God helps us with those things. And as far as wealth is concerned, everything that God has given you is in his stewardship. You are a steward of that property that God has given you. And one day he's going to call us to an account. So remember this. Fear God and keep his commandments. Be good stewards of what he has given you. We've been given, in the book of Ecclesiastes, an amazing collection of wisdom from the wisest man to ever live. One of the richest and most powerful men of his day. His insights about life and money and values and all those things are priceless. And we've looked at some of those today. One thing that's interesting to remember, and I think that you can summarize the teaching of Solomon in the whole book of Ecclesiastes simply like this. Life is utterly meaningless. And we agree with that, right? Without God. Life is utterly meaningless without God. And I have to say that before God came into my life, I felt despair. And I felt hopelessness. I know what that feels like. And I know many of you have experienced the same thing. A lot of us have gone through strange paths to get to God, haven't we? But then we wound up finding God. And when we found God, we realized this is what it's all about. Suddenly things began to make sense.